Hey, so I was thinking about those input devices and keyboards and auto hotkey and my auto mouse, and I was realizing that simplifying the interface completely. I've been working on a serial interface for this, and I've been slowly expanding it such that it is more usable from the serial interface. So you're not just typing commands into it and looking at the small screen on here. You're actually looking at the serial interface, and it's sending out relevant data. And in the case of this small screen, it's sending out more data so that you can see it on the terminal better. I haven't converted all the screens, but the point is I'm getting kind of a taste for operating the device straight or simply through a serial terminal. And it kind of got me thinking about the interface that I need and the outputs. So this is, I'm not sure if I don't think I've ever seen this before, because I do a lot of work with automation. So this might be somewhat unique. So I am interested to know what you might think of this. I'm pretty sure that with some quality software, you can plug a Pro Micro. You probably need an Arduino. Well, I don't really like the Arduino serial interface, but it's probably the best way to do it. An Arduino serial interface, and then program the Pro Micro to be a keyboard and a mouse, and to have serial interface on it, which is built into the board, a USB to serial. And then you plug it in, it registers as a mouse and as a keyboard and as a serial device, a USB serial device. And then via serial communication, you communicate with it and build macros through a menu interface, all managed through the serial interface. So then you have the ability to have this little macro building and executing machine, and you can kick off, well, that's not really useful. Let's say you could kick off the macros. You can initiate them by serial interface, but the point is your device that you're using, you're like using this device to talk to the device that's plugged into the device that you're talking to, so that it will talk to the device that you're talking to. I had this idea for a keyboard that would have a web interface for reprogramming it. And you can do that with an ESP32, but the idea that you would have that hosted on your keyboard, like you would be interfacing with the keyboard physically and electronically. So your keyboard has a web interface, all right? And you're typing into your keyboard, but your keyboard is plugged into a computer, right? And you're using that computer to connect to a web interface. And the web interface is connecting to your keyboard, which is connecting to your computer. So you have this hilarious feedback loop of typing on your keyboard to type into your computer, to type into your keyboard, to program your keyboard, which is plugged into your computer. Anyways, so this idea of having a separate microcontroller that is registers as a mouse and a keyboard, and you type into it on the same computer to generate the mouse and keyboard inputs, and build your macros and adjust them and do things like, create instructions and then insert instructions and adjust wait times and things like that. It would be like, a light assembly language, but it would certainly be very interesting. Now, it would be very easy to make it such that it well, it kind of still needs, yeah, it kind of still needs a, it still needs some level of user interface. So it needs to pulse and sense buttons, although the best way to do that is probably just to connect to a few of the buttons. Because most of my work lately has been about making microcontrollers that have inputs and outputs on them, and usually displays of some kind, so that you can build a light operating system for your device and then add features to the device, hence this Vexus. But I've been using the serial interface more and learning more about it, and just dumb terminals in general. And it's like, well, you already have an interface. You already have a device that can talk to it, send inputs to it, and get outputs from it, and display those outputs in a much more convenient form factor, too. It's much easier to work with than typing on this tiny keyboard. But I think it still needs some external interface, some buttons. And even if it's just 2 macros, that'd be just fine. I mean, the goal is to kind of have this be... I think it's really cool that you just have a Pro Micro and you plug it into the computer and say, all right, I'm going to build macros now by typing through the serial interface into the Pro Micro. And then the Pro Micro will execute them when? I guess you could... it would be useful to program it and say, you know, put it in run mode. Well, I don't know if it's able to detect whether or not it's connected to a serial interface. I know it can detect if the buffer is occupied, but perhaps if the buffer is not occupied for a period of time after power up. So you plug it in, it loads up, it waits for interface from the computer, and if it receives serial interface, then it won't auto run. Otherwise, you just plug it straight into a computer and it'll execute the macro, or the first macro and then the second macro, or some orientation thereof. But connecting simple buttons to one of the GPIO pins, and from there to the ground, although, well, no, I mean, that works. You set it high, and then it has, or set it low, rather, because they all have pull-ups. Yeah. Alright, so you would have a Pro Micro, and then you would solder some buttons directly to the pins in the ground, so that you can pull them down. And it's a lot of buttons. That's fine. You get yourself, you know, 6 macros or something like that. But it's kind of the form factor. I just really like the idea of the Pro Micro just being plugged directly into the Nope, that doesn't work. Okay. Yeah, I love the idea of just the Pro Micro just sitting there by itself. But it seems like it needs some kind of interface. Otherwise, you would create some Apple-esque complicated scheme of presses and interface in order to just make it look sleeker. You could probably fit 4 hardware buttons on there pretty easily. Yeah, that's interesting. Alright. Okay, yeah, so just for testing though, we can free wire some buttons onto the Pro Micro for executing macros, and then we can assign the buttons to those pins and execute the macros based on the pin pull. And oh, that would be a cool idea. So once you build something like that, you can build it into another device, or have 1/8 mono connectors coming out of it. Or you could do both. Who knows? Who cares? I don't know. It's just it's pure software. But I just never thought about the idea of having the device, programming the device live with the device that you're executing the code on. Now, obviously, you would need some type of... Yeah, that's fine. I mean, you could set it to auto-run. Yeah, it's just software. Yeah. This is cool. This is fine. Okay. So we just need a language of some sort, which is actually pretty easy to figure out. I've actually already done most of this work. Huh. The question becomes more of, like, how many instructions are we going to save in this macro? We could add a comment feature to make it easier to work with. Or not at all. And then you can write it to EEPROM once you get the macros built properly. And you can run it on a box that doesn't have any serial interface, or doesn't have the Arduino USB TTY connection. Doesn't need it, at least. So you don't have to install software. And then you would just have a little dongle that is a pure, a little Pro Micro shaped dongle that is nothing but a pure USB interface. You'd plug it straight in and it would just be 4 buttons. Oh, that's interesting. I think you could load the macro, or load the buttons, or you could load, if you just had one button, you could save more than one macro, and then you would load the macro into that button using serial interface, and then press the button, push the button. So I don't think, I mean, it must have been done before, but, I mean, obviously, if you have a Pro Micro and it's a keyboard and a mouse, you can build that interface pretty easily and say, when I plug it in and push a button, it presses 3 buttons. But I don't know of anyone who's built a live macro interface for a Pro Micro for building macros and, saving and loading them and replaying them. So that'll be a fun bit of code. I'm just trying to think of what would help me in a lot of these cases in my efforts to type less and mouse less. I'm just thinking about this. I have a lot of the code already written, so I don't know. I feel like it would just would be rather easy to hack something together. Cool. What do you think and stuff? I just want the quick iteration time. I want to be able to build a macro and then be like, oh, it's different, and then tweak it and run it again, and tweak it and run it again, and then get it just right, and then set it to a button and forget about it. And just be able to run it whenever. All right.